In 2007, I was running the professional services business at a company called BroadSoft, which is a cloud telephony software provider to the same marketplace of operators, companies like Verizon and France Telecom and Comcast. And I wanted to go out and pursue some new ideas about how to help these operators deliver more and better cloud services, because they had this huge incumbent customer base, but the network side of things, as they would call it, which is all their service elements, including things like BroadWorks. So BroadWorks is an application server. It sits in the facilities of these operators, and it delivers voice services and web collaboration, all these things that the operator would walk into a company like this and say, hey, do you want to have us run your phone system for you? The IT side of things, which was sort of the other hemisphere that these people had operationally and have, which is basically what we would probably call enterprise software in the Valley, that was really lagging behind, and it still does. And then a lot of this stuff that had consulting that would be provided internally by the operator or by these vendors, and those were usually services around pulling all these things together to create a cool product, re-engineering the processes that they've been using to sell these totally different types of services, and customization and integration to make all this stuff work together. So that's where Lineage started, in the consulting business. And that was more of a monkey bar thing than a big leap, to put it in children's playground terms. The thing that I was doing was selling consulting services that I'd already been running a team to deliver to a market that I already knew very well. So that really wasn't very hard at all. But what was very hard, and what we didn't know about beforehand, was we were taking the things that we were learning and the money that we were accruing in the consulting business, and we were starting to build software. And that's where we're going to start, the ideation section of this example, is how we went about doing that, the story of how we went about doing that at Lineage. So first thing I did was screw up. Bad. I built a product called Prometheus that was a business intelligence product that allowed the operators to see what services their end users were using and how often they use them. And I thought, this is going to be fantastic, because this will help them learn about this new product space more quickly. They will improve their product quality, which is so important when they're competing with all these other people over the internet. And nobody does this now. They can't do it. There's no way to know this in a reasonable way. And it turned out that they didn't want to, it wasn't that they didn't want to know those things, but it was the middle of the recession, so they had more core concerns. And they were kind of looking for us for this advice on what should the service definition be anyhow. And so it didn't sell very well. And we're kind of like, well, we disproved that. Bad idea. Although we could have done it in a much, much smaller batch, in a much more limited fashion. So the most important thing was that I kind of relearned that I needed to be going out and really validating the relative importance of what I've been learning, all these things I've been learning on the consulting side, and getting into the brass tacks more with those things. So we did 3 more products, and these actually sold really well because we did those things. We validated them in advance. They came straight out of things that were clear, present, urgent problems. And you know what? The most interesting thing about these 3 products is they weren't the hardest things. People that go to Stanford always want to do something hard. That's why I did Prometheus. I was like, this is hard. They're going to love this. It's so difficult. They're going to reward me for my ingenuity and hard work. But they didn't. They didn't buy it. We layered in some things later that they really wanted, which were super simple. And then all of a sudden it started selling, and I was like, oh God, I can't believe I did this again. So we learned that we had a service design practice on our consulting side, and we were helping the customers pull together all these things they had into good products. And one thing we kept running into with the business owner was they couldn't get good, high-quality self-care portals to come together. It was big, big development projects, and IT organizations cost millions of dollars and take years and years to get these things done. And that sort of was the product. With the cloud product, that's it. I mean, there's these things that happen, but the portal is how you really see and interact with the product. So that needed to be really good. But the great thing was there were architectures available where we as a vendor could create a platform that would be a great out-of-the-box portal experience, and yet would have a layer on it that would allow the operator to make it look however they wanted and integrate with the rest of their stuff. It's a tool set called Smarty, if any of you guys are in the web software development sphere. And that was a product we called Local Portal. It sold great. There's operators all over the world using it, millions of end customers on it, and that was great. Was it super duper hard? No, not really. I mean, it took a lot of work, and it took a lot of doing, but it wasn't like we weren't splitting the atom. It wasn't fundamentally a really, really hard thing to do. The next thing we noticed was that we have a process design practice. We help re-engineer processes with the operators, and it was taking the folks in the back office hours, literally hours, to do all the configuration and setup to put together even like a 40-person office that they've gone and sold to a small business. And and what they had to do was like hellishly repetitive and boring. It was terrible. So it was the obvious thing to do was to automate it, but the legacy systems were not very well adapted to doing this, and there really wasn't a way to do it. We came up with a very lightweight architecture that automated, standardized all this stuff, and kind of sidestepped the legacy IT systems, so we didn't make that whole mess more complicated. And that was a product we called Loki Provisioning. Was it super complicated from an engineering standpoint? It took a lot of work and a lot of tuning, but it was really about understanding exactly how this thing should work and how it should be set up in the carrier's operating environment. And then the deliverables for these process designs we were doing implied certain things about how the back office software should work, CRM, order management, things like that. And we were really struggling with our operators to implement all the process design changes that we've been recommending. And the thing is, there were great platforms out there, SAP, Salesforce, Oracle, things like that, but it's amazing. I don't know how many, if any of you are in enterprise software, but 50 to 70% of those types of CRM or enterprise software implementations fail, which is amazing. And I think there's a lot of different reasons, but a lot of them are, the design coherence, the working in small batches and biting off reasonable pieces so you can make progress, and having the right balance of like, look, it's got to work this way, along with, well, we can kind of customize around the edges so people can do what they want. And on that basis, we built Loki BPM, which was a business layer system that we built on top of Sugar CRM, and then we did a version on Salesforce.com. And this was an end-to-end kind of business layer replacement for these operators, which was a big deal. This is a big thing for us to attempt at that point, and it's worked out great for us. We're very happy with it. So it wasn't that other people hadn't identified the need for these things, or that there was nothing out there. I think what made us successful in this space as a relatively small company in a relatively short period of time is that we were just more detail-oriented. We were more empathic about all the different audiences of the operator. And this is worth taking note of, because some of you are in medical devices. It's very important when you're developing personas and you're doing all this stuff, not just to think about the end user of the product. Because one of the things that really helped us here is, we have a personas document we keep. We have 12 different personas, which in some situations could be excessive, but absolutely not here, because you need to pay attention to not just the end user, but then the product manager, the IT person, the web development person at the operator, the person that runs this stuff. I remember a conversation I had with one of our network engineers years ago. It was actually at a different company. I said, hey, there's two routing protocols that are really popular, RIP and OSPF. How many of you are familiar with routing? Probably a few. So OSPF is a faster convergence time, meaning that it's going to find out what it ought to do if something breaks, and it needs to reroute quicker than RIP. So boring so far, I know. But the interesting thing is, I asked this guy, hey, well, why would anybody run RIP? It's slower. And he said, well, OSPF is really complicated. A lot of engineers aren't really that comfortable debugging it and managing it and setting it up. And that's when I realized, wow, it's not just the end user that's the persona you have to deal with. You have to sort of think about everybody that's going to touch the product, because if you have something that a critical audience doesn't like interacting with, that's going to be a huge problem for you. So, like in a medical device thing, which I know nothing about, but I could conjecture that, you have the patient, you have the operating physician, but, what about the people that, need to go find it or warehouse it or explain it, or, there's like so many other ways that you interact with products that are kind of non-obvious, but yeah, can be very pivotal and can be a great source of competitive advantage. So at a little more granular level, this is a screen from our Loki Portals product. And another thing we learned in this service design practice, when we actually went out and looked at end customers and businesses like this and how they use their phone system, is most of the changes that get made on this cloud telephony platform are made by some kind of customer administrator. So in a firm like this, it's relatively medium to probably, how many people work here, 40, 100 people? There's probably an IT person, and they're probably the ones responsible for doing it. A small business might be the business owner. That's the person that tends to go in and make changes, reset passwords, change the way the phone system works and whatnot, as opposed to an end user, somebody sitting at a desk. That's one thing we learned. The second thing we learned is that it's often 6 to 9 months from when the system gets installed to when that person wants to log in and do something. And so what happens is if what they want to find is 3 to 4 clicks away, and it's maybe a little non-obvious how to get to it, they're going to bail and they're going to call up and say, hey, how do I do this? And that's bad for everybody because they don't want to sit on the phone and the operator doesn't want to be called. So we built a new page that we call dashboards, and it allows the the customer admin to go in and see the 80th percentile of things they might do on a single page. So it seems like a fairly obvious thing to do, but this was a big game changer. So did we put in like lots and lots of stuff here? No. We just put in a very small amount of stuff, got it out to a few critical customers that roll things out quickly, and we validated that the customers really like this and they in fact used it, and they absolutely did. It was great. And then and only then did we layer in more stuff and made it bigger and so forth. This is a small example of how we made incremental progress with these techniques after we had the product out in the market. Another thing we learned is that receptionists and other types of power users, they have some very specific configurations on the phones that they like. And so if we encapsulate this in these user stories we talked about, one story is, as a receptionist, I want to receive an out-of-the-box setup that's created against best practices, so I don't have to do it all myself. That's reasonable, right? We all like to, when we buy something, we want it to take it out and kind of be the way that we want. And then the second story is they still want to be able to change it up around the edges. So this was, something we learned in the field. We felt pretty good about this. We felt pretty validated about it. So the fairly obvious thing we did was we built a module in the portal where you could see your phone and actually, change around the buttons. So if we, just as a kind of tactical example here, if we look at an example of how to pair test cases with these stories, this is our first user story here, and here's the test case. Because when we start parsing through this whole out-of-the-box thing, it means, well, we have to have a template of what that's going to be, because we're not going to necessarily define that. And that's going to be something a product manager, one of these operators, wants to define. Okay, well, how are they going to do that? Because they don't have access to probably these engineering interfaces to manage the product, so we need to have a visual interface that they can use. And again, the interesting thing is, little things like, well, the product manager can't really get in and do what they want to do to get these templates the way they want. Those things can absolutely hose you, and you'll never even know it. So that's also an example of how it's important to take account of these sort of non-obvious audiences. Anyway, a few other test cases here. And then when we go to the receptionist, when we start parsing through how this is going to work, another important thing is there's this idea in UX of safe exploration. How many of you are familiar with that? So the idea is, you want to assure the user implicitly that no matter what they do, they can't break whatever it is that they're working on too bad. And if they do, they can go back to home base, reset it, change it. So we have a test case about that we paired with this thing of the receptionist wants to change buttons. And we have a few other test cases. So this is what the thing looks like now. You can go in, it's very literal. You can see the buttons and play with them, just to give you a sense of what it looks like. The thing that we've talked about is how you go out and understand users, and that's how you build things. If you're part of an ecosystem of some sort, it is also still important to look for inflection points, things that change in your ecosystem that enable you to do something that you couldn't do before. And that's sort of a different aspect of this idea of design thinking, is having empathy for how are people looking at everything that they buy, and how do you fit into that. So a couple examples of that for us are this Loki Portals visual device management thing that we built was enabled by a new framework on the host platform, BroadWorks, that we probably would not have gone and built that thing if that hadn't existed, because we would have had to build our own big data structure and all this stuff that would have made some of the critical assumptions that I'm going to show you in a minute very, very tenuous or invalid. And then another example is our Loki BPM product. It was really the excellent third-party developer platforms that are relatively new on Salesforce and Sugar CRM that enable us to do that stuff. So it's important to keep an eye out for those opportunities, because they do, in fact, change the game a little bit and enable things. On planning, at Lean, we have these hypotheses. So these are the things that we talked about. We drive towards a pivot or persevere moment. As a company that already has some products where we've ascertained a product market fit, we also maintain a set of theses. So we have validated a set of assumptions for a given product, but especially in high tech, the operating environment is changing all the time. So it's very important, even when you validated these things, to regard them as kind of a working assumption that's become true, but you can't assume it's always going to be true, of course. So we vet these things, we keep an eye on them, and it actually really helps us make sure that we're focused on the right things, that the key things in our operating environment that need to stay true for these things to be a good business for us continue to be true. This is a very useful thing that you may want to try if you work in an existing company. So we're going to go through the assumptions that we laid out for this visual device management thing that I just showed you guys. One, end users want to have this, basically. Well, luckily, our partner had already built a prototype, and they didn't roll it out, but there's massive demand in the market. So we had the huge advantage of already knowing that there was a lot of demand for this. That certainly helped. Two, it had to be a good idea to actually give this to users, which is kind of a non-obvious thing, but if they gave this to people and they kept breaking their phone or getting confused and calling up and complaining, it wasn't worth doing, right? I mean, it might be a cool thing, but it's going to lose them money and goodwill. And we had to go out and do beta testing to really find that out with our operators. It had to be supportable for us. So if the operator was going to have trouble, it's a relatively complicated plumbing, actually, to make all this stuff work. And if it was going to keep breaking and they were to keep calling us and we were going to have to fix it and incur those costs, because we have a fixed cost support contract, that was bad. And all these things that are priority one, this is just a matter of personal preference, but these are the existential assumptions. These are like, if one of these is not true, we should not do this. We had a validate price point, and then everything else here is important, but not not existential, not a thing of like, well, we won't do this if this isn't true. So the capability had to make sense possibly for the end user as opposed to the customer admin. Well, we kind of invalidated that. End users don't seem to use the portal much, so we didn't do that. And sometimes not doing stuff is as important as doing stuff, because you don't want to generate a lot of extra software that you have sitting around you have to deal with, and you don't want to waste your time or your customers' time. Then we're looking at new phones all the time and things like that. So this is an example of how we laid out these assumptions for a line extension that, while it wasn't a new product and it wasn't exactly a startup, it was a fairly material change to our product. It was a pretty big thing. So if we walk through this scientific method thing with the visual device management, this idea emerged from some observation and some research. We had to believe that we could make a compelling, useful, supportable solution. That's what we designed our experiments around. We did lab work with our customers, followed by limited commercial release. And we'll talk about how we do that in a minute, because it's very important. And then we validated the results. It was supportable. It was something we wanted to continue spending money on rather than revise, and that's essentially how we went through this. So, these things work at a very small scale even. This wasn't a big, huge new enterprise, but these techniques are lightweight enough where they were still extremely helpful on the margin for us. When you go out, a lot of these assumptions are about customer behavior. I think that there's a few things that have changed a little bit about how that works for most people. One thing is that, if something's good, it'll go viral. There's sort of that idea. But, that's not necessarily true. And a lot of, there's always like myths applied backwards to big successes. So, like Facebook is probably thought of being a viral success, but actually they were very surgical in a lot of ways about how they did their customer adoption. And certainly believing that if something's good, it'll go viral is not a good way to organize your actual business. So the classical idea for this is Jeff Moore's contributions to the technology adoption lifecycle, the Chasm. How many of you are familiar with that? Sort of, required reading in Silicon Valley. So I think that that's very applicable and helpful, but the Chasm's in a lot of cases a lot smaller now, because it was built when people were making big hardware decisions and technologies weren't very interoperable. What's the switching cost for an app on your phone or a cloud solution you try out in the enterprise? It's much smaller. It's still not zero, but it's much smaller. I like billiards, actually. So the first thing I learned about playing pool, after learning how to hit the ball, was you have to look at where you leave the cue ball, the white ball, after your first shot. It's not just getting the ball in. You have to leave yourself in a place where you can get the next ball in. So let's say somebody building an app Yeah, okay. So let's say we're going to build an app, and it's going to be for working moms and kids that like Snoop Dogg. This shot is probably not going to line up very well, right? Because these people spend a lot of time together in minivans, but the kids don't want to be using the same thing as parents, right? So that's kind of what I mean by this ability. I think this is a lot more facile and easy to use in a lot of situations. Rather, this is kind of big and complicated. So another way of thinking about this, at Leonid, we have a set of what we call Goldilocks customers. And they are not our biggest customers, and they're not our smallest customers, but they have a very substantial operation. But they also, when we give them something that they like, they'll roll it out quickly, and they'll give us good, specific feedback about what's happening. And they are so critical to us, especially being able to roll out new features. Very, very important. So that's how we operate that. And it's the worst thing you could do, and this happens to startups a lot, is have some big, huge customer is going to be your first customer. Because then everything's predicated on their particular set of requirements, and it's going to be a long time and a lot of risk before you learn. It's something that happens, but it's the temptation to focus on that should be tempered by the understanding that it's completely the opposite of what you ideally want in a startup, which is to find out whether the market at large likes this thing or not quickly. So I mentioned the business model canvas. At Leonid, we have big incumbent operators, people like AT&T and Verizon, France Telecom, medium competitive operators. These are folks that have established some particular competitive focus, like Level 3 or Time Warner Telecom. Small niche operators, like we have an operator that sells a SaaS application for auto dealerships, and they sell communications alongside that. Value propositions. This was really important because we were like, well, we make enterprise software. It makes things work better, it makes things cheaper. And when we got our new VP of sales last year, he really helped us focus these things a lot. And what we really learned, that was the most important thing, was reducing the time and the risk to get new things to market. Because that was the most important thing for these operators. So yeah, we reduce costs, and yeah, we implement these known best practices, but it was really the focus on, look, this is the fastest, lowest risk way you can go to market. That turned out to be the most important thing. We sell through channels mostly right now, which is great because it keeps our SG&A down. And we have dedicated personal assistants. So like any company that sells a relatively large amount of stuff to a relatively small amount of customers, we vet them individually. They have their own people they can call. We have licensing, maintenance, and support consulting. We do a little bit of SaaS, but not very much right now. And actionable insight on what to do is really the most important thing. Our building actual software is super important. Doing a good operation around deploying this stuff is important, but the most important thing we do is having actionable insight on what's going to make our customers money. So we develop the products. We have these process-driven IT things that we do to help us effectively do that. But again, the most important thing is we help basically our operators develop their business. Our resellers are really our most key partners, but I would say our next set of most key partners is third-party developers. So and working with a partner of substance like a third-party developer is really an art. And there's a few people in Silicon Valley that are famous for doing it extremely well. I think we're okay at it. We're not great, but we did recognize early on how important it was, and we absolutely went the extra mile to create a couple of success stories early on, which really helped us down the road a lot. It was very much a situation of very sensitive dependence on the initial conditions of what those folks encountered. And like most software companies, we have a fixed cost development program, and then we have relatively linear costs at scale with consulting and support and things like that. So let's take a quick look at how this shook out in our actual financial results. So revenue-wise, we started out in 2007, we were doing consulting, then we started to do some software, but we didn't really count it in for revenue. We only did it once it wasn't existential to the company to go on and do this stuff. Because we never raised $1 of venture capital. We never had any money sitting around, other than what we earned and retained in the business. So that kept our expenses very small and variable against the revenue in the beginning. And then on a validated basis, then we took a little bit of a plunge and built our fixed cost development and operations organization. We had a little bit of debt that we paid back pretty quickly early on, and now we just do bank financing, and we were always profitable. And this really is what ties in a lot of these new planning techniques. Our visibility in the beginning, it kind of did a little bit of a U. So in the beginning, it was pretty good. We were doing consulting. It was a pretty known thing. We had pretty good visibility about whether we were going to make money or not. Then it dipped because we started to get into the software business, and we didn't do anything that was existentially threatening to the business, but we were certainly investing all of our extra dollars in these software experiments. So our visibility kind of dipped in 2008 and 2009, and then it came out of the trough in 2010 as we had a set of validated recipes that we were able to go out and scale and apply. And Prometheus didn't help. Everybody talked about that. We sort of threw a bunch of money at that, and so it wasn't like this hockey stick thing or perfect story or anything. We had bumps along the road, and then now it's relatively high for our current products, and then moderate for our new products. It would be low, except most of them are sort of somewhat extensions of things that we already do. So organizationally, what that meant was just me in the beginning. So it's nice if you have a skill set where you can go and start the business yourself, do a little consulting, experiment with some product development or service development of some sort. We had development contractors. And one of the biggest mistakes I see happening with software startups is that the first thing they do is like, well, I don't know how to develop, so the first thing I'm going to do is go find a developer. And the problem is whatever they're using to pay that developer, goodwill, stock, cash, they spend that in the beginning before they really know what they want to build, and that it kind of fizzles. So that's an important thing to avoid, whether you're building software or if you need to bring any kind of outside people in to work on your thing. Do this stuff first. I think it'll really help you figure out what you want to build and save your treasure. As we got bigger, we created a permanent management function around development and operations, scaled the development team, and now we have a senior management team, guys much more qualified than me to run the business. And we've scaled up that development operations team. We still do relatively small batch things in Agile because our customers depend on us to be relatively adaptable and responsive to things that we're mutually learning in the market. And like I said, we have those customer development teams, so when we have a brand new thing we want to do, we don't apply our organizational structure that we built to scale up the business to this because it's not appropriate to those startups inside our own business. So how do you put yourself in a position to do these things? You guys have been professionals, I think most of you, for probably a pretty long time, but I speak to a lot of students and young people, and I think that the question I get a lot is, should I learn how to code, or should I learn some particular technical skill? And I think it's great to do those things, and especially when people are young or students, they should. But I think that learning these foundation concepts is the most important thing, particularly if you're going to be the entrepreneur, the manager. These foundation skill sets we talked about are a good place to start. If you're in the software business, which it sounds like only some of you are, I think that learning software fundamentals about like the model view controller framework is a really great, simple starting place. Learning architecture fundamentals, what's the difference between an API integration and a plugin integration. Learning the technical roles, what's the difference between a QA and a sysadmin and a developer. These things are very achievable and they'll help you a lot. Learning how to be a product owner in Agile, the person who's answering or going out and getting the answers to questions, easy to do, very helpful. There actually are a few slightly non-obvious things that I think help people that haven't practiced that before get ready. Process design is good for scaling, and then and that's when if you're looking to do a career pivot, that's when I would look to learn how to do Ruby or become an SEO expert or something like that. Because I think without these foundation things, you'll have trouble validating what you really want to learn about in detail, and you may not have the context to be very effective with them. So to close off the story about Leonid, we do Agile. We do it in 1-month cycles now, although we're moving to quarterly releases next year to kind of lighten the load on documentation and QA. This is one of the maniacal things that I did that our new, more professional management team is backing off on. We had monthly releases before. And what we do is we kind of manage between, the idea with Agile is you don't decide what's going to be in these iterations until a week or two or whatever your planning cycle is before them. At Leonid, we do have things that we're obliged to do in advance, so we create a predictive kind of bedrock of things that we just know we have to do. It's a subsystem we have to support. It's a multi-month project we're doing with the customer. But then we're able to leave adaptive headroom against that, and that works fine. I think that the biggest problem with newcomers practicing Agile, the thing that intimidates them, I find, is that there's all this, supposed orthodoxy about how it's supposed to work, which is inaccurate and untrue. It's a set of very understandable, actionable ideas that anybody can understand. So, before we do questions, let's take a second, unless the person sitting next to you is scary, close your eyes for a second, and we'll do a little exercise. So, think about the ideas around design thinking and ideation. Is there an opportunity where you can apply that to what you're doing right now? Something you could do soon? What about this idea of applying the scientific method, of creating a set of assumptions and focusing on proving them out? Is that something that would make sense for your particular endeavor? Take a second to think about that. And what about customer development? Is your organization, or the organization you're planning to build, is it appropriately suited to the mission at hand, to ascertaining if that's where you are, your product market fit, or is it kind of set up to look like a big company, but maybe it should be a little more fluid? Okay, that was the end of the exercise. So, a few things in closing. If you are building an app or a B2C thing, there's another example module on /speaking on my website that you can look at if you want. It's a company called Pheasant that's doing an app for families. And if you're not in high tech at all, there's an example about an artisanal ice creamery called The Penny that you can watch if you're outside of high tech. And this is my Twitter. This is my blog. If you're interested, there's a few resources on the website, templates, financial models. In particular, there's a Google Doc that has some templates and an example about how to build personas and stories and layout assumptions. You can download it and use it and so forth. There's also a series of workshops I do with another author named Greg Cowan, who wrote a really great book about Agile called Agile Excellence for Product Managers. If you're doing a startup and you're interested, we have a sign-up thing for that. And if you're interested in having a speaker or you just want to catch up, feel free to drop me a line. And I'll be at the Silicon Valley Product Management Association on the 5th, which is 3 Wednesdays from now, in somewhere around here, Menlo Park or something like that. If you're interested, there's a lot of different places to learn about these ideas, and there's more stuff on the website that's totally, completely free. If you're interested in learning about this stuff more, we have the books here. You can buy one if you want, or they're available at leading retailers all over the place. Thanks. Let's take some questions. Does anybody have any? Yes?
Talking about Agile and being responsive to your customers, to what extent is that a sort of express philosophy and strategy? And is there any point where you're like, no, we'll just try to be big and we'll try to just, not need to be as responsive? Is that a
I think that the biggest tension in that whole question is around, are we doing what our customers tell us, or are we kind of acting on behalf of the customer and we're sort of learning what they need? That's like the Steve Jobs thing, like I'm the genius and I know what the customer wants, versus we have staff that are like, a big customer, he yelled at me and he said he wants it to work like this. We have to train a lot of our customer-facing people, like, hey, just because if we let the customers design our software, it would be complete junk by now. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that's the basic kind of yin and yang of like how you're trying to figure out how responsive you need to be to the customer. Are you acting on their behalf? Are you doing what they tell you? Visionary customers will tell you things that you should just go do that are incredible. And then there's customers that will tell you crazy things that you really have to look about why did they say that and why did they think they want that, rather than like literally interpret what they say.
Well, okay, I think that's a great point. Also, it's a question of, let's see, I think especially with sort of incumbent big players, maybe the #1 in the industry, as consumers sometimes we perceive them to be kind of, they don't care.
Often they don't.
Doing to build, or can they keep on surviving, or?
Oh, I think they'll fail over the long term, yeah. Because but it may take a very long time. Because the thing is, if they don't fail from a market perspective, creating a product that, and look, I work in telecom. I mean, lots of the legacy parts of those telecoms are, not very well liked, right? The phone company or whatever. I mean, it's ultimately very demoralizing to the people inside a company as well if they have the perception that nobody likes the product. So all those things head in the same direction, and I don't think that you keep a franchise healthy forever. But I mean, it really depends on the competitive environment. Look at the electric company. I mean, maybe you don't like them, but they'll probably be around for a while. But maybe not forever, right? I mean, things are changing. There's all different ways to generate and distribute energy.
Private water.
Yeah, private water is another good one. Yeah. So it really depends on the competitive environment, but no, ultimately they'll go by the wayside and somebody else will take over. Yes.
How do you build persona? Is that person an actual person that you know, or you made up that person from person A, B, and C that you know, and you pull that up together? Or
good question. I usually have a person in mind, but then I kind of create an amalgam. I think the really good trick is to always make sure you name the persona. Bob, Jane, Mary, whatever. That'll help. The biggest thing you have to guard against is the persona becoming arbitrary. Obviously people do this. Well, they're like this. They're 19 to 27. That's the thing that will really hose you. That I see happen the most. I find myself doing it still. I did it last week. I was writing this persona. I was like, I just try to do it in a hurry. I was like, this is crap. I need to go back and who am I thinking about here? And so tools that force you to think about who they really are important. I wouldn't do it generally on one person. But if that's all you got, it's better than nothing, for sure. Yes?
I think for B2C, that's still, easy, but what about a B2B customer, right? I mean, how do you build a persona for that if your startup focuses on B2B?
Well, that's a great question. I think that, you have a lot more personas, first of all, right? Because a B2B thing has many different audiences, right? You're selling your product, there's the person that kind of operates it, there's the person that uses it. But, you do it the exact same way. Look at Cisco, These guys started off with a technical innovation that they were focused on, and that's how they got their initial franchise. But I would say that their most enduring and profitable innovation is their training and certification program. I mean, this is an incredible brainwashing franchise. Everybody, they become the gold standard for everybody. Do you know IP networking or not? And I think that they had to have a certain kind of empathy about, I think they thought about the people that use their products. I think they thought about the people that hire the people that use their products. I think they thought about the people that hire consultants to work on products. I think they thought about everything, probably a dozen personas in their ecosystem, explicitly or implicitly, to come up with that idea and decide to focus on it. So I think you end up with more personas in B2B rather, sorry. But I think they're an incredible source of competitive advantage. Look, I mean, we're an enterprise software. How they say pizza, even when it's not very good, it's still pretty good. Well, enterprise software is the opposite. Even when it's good, it kind of sucks. Because people don't like to do the crap that you have to do in enterprise software, right? So, and what happens? Most enterprise software companies, and look, you guys went to Stanford. Probably everybody in here probably has at least 2 to 3 friends that work in enterprise software. We live in Silicon Valley, right? What happens is they stop caring, and the software becomes, it kind of relates to the question that you asked earlier, how long can you survive building horrible enterprise software? A very long time, apparently. but eventually somebody will come and subsume you. And so it's important to still stay focused on all those personas. And, I get asked, when I do these workshops with Cowan. He works for a company called the 280 Group that does bigger, more mature companies, and they're always like, I don't know, how do we do this? How do we start innovating again? It's kind of like their problem. And it's interesting. The thing that I think everybody can do is just don't ask for permission. Just go create some personas. You're not going to get in trouble, of course. I'm not saying this is a conceptual barrier for you, right? But we run into this. They're like, well, I don't know if they're going to approve making all decisions based on personas. So what? Just go do them. They'll help somebody. If no one other than yourself, they'll help you. So I think have you done personas in your area?
No. I mean,
I'd try it out. You know, it can't hurt. I mean, the worst thing, you'll just like learn about how to use them, and it'll help you in something else.
I was
Yes.
a little bit late. Any
Do you
point?
want me to just go through it again?
Like to help creating the personas, what are the best preferences?
My book is the best way, really. That's a good question. I think that, well, first of all, this page on my site has a link to a template that has some notes on that and some example personas you can use as a starting point. So that's free. It's easy to get at. I would recommend starting there. You know, beyond the stuff that I cover, I'm kind of an interdisciplinarian. You know, the books from the guys at IDEO, Tom Kelly and his brother, and those are very good. There's a book called The 10 Faces of Innovation, which is a really good book about just all the different facets of the practice of design thinking. Yes?
In the early days of Leonid, you mentioned it was just you.
Yep.
So I wonder what advice you would give to someone who is not a developer but requires the skills of one because he or she has the idea that needs one.
Right. I would, well, I run into this situation a lot, as you can imagine. The number one thing is do all this stuff up front. You know, go learn about your users. Drive to the point where, you're building wireframes, and tools like Balsamic are really great. I mean, are you building a piece of software or robots or?
Probably maybe an app, but website.
Yeah.
So
I would do all these things, right? Go out, create your assumptions. Start with, this stuff's sort of in chronological order. So I would start with create the personas, the user stories. What are the assumptions for the business to be successful? Why do people care about this? Do all this stuff. And then, it's a website. There's really great tools for building prototypes and wireframes. There's a tool called Balsamic, which I think is really good. It's quite cheap. Sketch the stuff out. We're a law firm. And, the thing one of the things I hated most about working in a larger company was, not the lawyers, I'm not going to say that, because I didn't. It was the business people who, when they had to get a deal done, they're like, all right, well, so they want to buy this thing, we'll just leave it to the lawyers. Well, that was a way of saying, like, I don't want to work out all the important business terms, which is actually the hard part, with these people, so I'm just going to kick it over to lawyers. Don't do that with developers, you know what I mean? And most of the hardest things that they're going to have to wonder about are things that are going to have to come from you. So, bless you, it's well within your ability to, do all this stuff, drive to like a prototype, example screens, look, don't reinvent the wheel. Look at some similar applications just for a view of like, layout and how does the UI work. And you're not there to tell them how to build the thing, but you're there to say, look, this is how I thought it might work. This is an example of a somewhat similar application, whether or not it's in your domain that works in a similar way that I think might be a good starting point. Do all that stuff, because if you have them do it, it's kind of like asking a lawyer to like go do the deal when you haven't really done all the terms. They're going to have to like rehash all that stuff. They don't know as well as you anyway. You won't get a good result and you'll waste a lot of money.
Okay.
Those are the main things. Yes?
Yeah, first, thanks for doing all this.
Thanks for
really
coming.
Helpful. And I was also wondering, what are the implications for the iterative management approach to a systems approach? Someone like me who's very, even though I'm putting myself out there as a QI guy, interactions, I'm also very much a systems thinker. And so I like to think things through. I like to look at the whole picture.
Well, I think you think through the enterprise, and that's the basis on which you make the assumptions. The danger. There's a lot of systems thinkers that went to Stanford, not surprisingly, right? And I kind of consider myself one of them in some sense. And the biggest problem you run into is that you have this ability to like think through all these things and create this design and this artifice, and you have to be ready to let the things that you learn out in the real world invalidate all that and just sweep it away. Have you guys ever seen the Buddhist monks that make those sand paintings and they sweep them away? I love that. I mean, not because I like to willfully just trash stuff, but I think so many. Sometimes I do, The worst thing you can do is fixate on like, well, I thought of this, I thought really hard about it, I think it's right. Somebody said it was wrong, and that made me feel bad, so I'm going to fixate on it even more. That's sort of the death spiral of having thought through stuff too much and being too certain about it. But it's good to be a systems thinker, but it's not good to get too permanent in anything you come up with, I think, personally. Yes?
Has it happened to you that a customer told you his needs and you know exactly how to solve it technically, but you don't have the resources to solve it?
Oh, yeah. Every day. I mean, sure.
How do you deal with the customer?
Well, if they have the money, we have the time, ultimately. That's the main thing. We actually, when we get feature requests, basically, like idea stuff they want to do, we put them all in one of three buckets, A, B, or C. A means that, I don't know if this is appropriate, it's not appropriate for like B2C, but works for us. A means, hey, that's a great idea. Thank you. We're going to do that when we can. We sort of, and we think it's investable. It's within our means to get it done, in a reasonable time frame. Then there's B, which is either, hey, that's not a bad idea, but it's not a very compelling idea. The rest of our customers, we don't think are going to like that. But if you want to pay for it, it's not going to make the product worse, so we'll do it. Again, that's really a B2C thing, right? We have big customers that will do that. Or that's a great idea, but we just can't manage it, so you're going to have to, help us fund this to get it done. And C is like, hey, that's a terrible idea. Let's back up and look at what it really is you're trying to achieve and whether there's some other ideas about how to go about that. But then it really depends. It's kind of a B2C question. I mean, a B2B question. So mostly that's what we do. You have to decide where you're going to invest in the product, and it cannot be the people that yell the loudest. That's as a manager, that's one of the things you're always kind of working to is, you have these quietly successful customers, and then you have these people that are yelling and screaming, who maybe are just going to dry up and be unsuccessful. It's very hard to get everybody to be like, don't go have another meeting with that guy that's yelling and screaming. Have a meeting with that guy who's quietly successful, because we want to know what they're doing, not what this other guy's doing. Does that answer the question at all? Okay. Yes?
For this business model canvas, once you develop that, I didn't quite get what's the next step. How do you use that thing?
Oh, yeah, good question. Well, it depends on what you need to do. It's one of several tools. So, if it's okay, I'll answer the question. Like, let's assume you do all these other things, like lay out your assumptions, create a financial model, and the business model canvas.
I mean, in the context of the startup, is
right.
Trying to validate its idea.
Right. I think that you do it, and it's the biggest problem with the 5-year plan is nobody ever wants to like dust it off and read through it. It's like long and boring, So I think that the classic answer would be you do the business model canvas. There's like a big version on Alex Osterwald's website you can print out. And you put it up on the wall, and it's this thing that everybody keeps looking at and asking questions about. So I think it's a good, very visible focal point to just use on an ongoing basis. To put it online where everybody can look at it. There's some people that have published sites where you can do that. Or if you're all in the same place, put it up on a wall and just keep looking at it. I think that would be sort of the typical answer.
But how do you use that to make decisions? Like,
what decision?
To validate assumptions or come up.
It won't help you validate assumptions. To validate the assumptions, the tool I would use is just a simple table like the one I showed. And there's one up here. Lay them out, write down the experiments, whatever. They're not going to fit in a little table, right? I go, write them down. How are you going to? Typical lean startup, and this really applies to software and stuff. Experiment, right? Would be we've got, do pregnant mothers want to use an app to, I don't know, listen to their fetus? Okay, let's just assume that makes any sense at all. Okay, you run an AdWords campaign. You see if people come to your website and sign up and say, yeah, I want to learn more about it. That's your initial validation. So the business model canvas is more a tool for thinking through. Well, have we considered all the pieces we need to run this business?
Could I add to that? When I've talked to Dr. Osterwald or others, Steve Blank, what they're saying is, okay, if we change something up here, this is a multivariate equation, change something up here, this is going to be an implication for all these other 8 variables, total 9 on the canvas, I think.
9, yep.
And so the whole idea is just say, wait, if I push it here, what's gonna pop out on the other side? Does that help? Because sometimes people say, oh, wow, great idea. And if you do waterfall development, you can be a long way down and very expensively down a path. And,
Yeah.
We forgot something.
Yeah. Or, you know, you learn something and, oh, that person doesn't want to be our partner. You know, so yeah, it's a good, you know, you put it up, when things change, you know, you sort of run through that thing, yeah. Make sure, make it very visible. The main virtue of it is that it's highly visible and easy to understand. Yes?
So when you're developing a product for the consumer market, let's say a website, you know, and you're using Agile development, right? When you're validating these assumptions, how do you navigate through so many variables that can impact your results? Like, for example, you know, you have a hypothesis and you're starting to validate it. How do you know whether the response is because maybe you didn't have the right marketing or the right design or the right UI versus whether, you know, the hypothesis is correct or not?
Mm-hmm.
Alex, this is the last question.
Okay.
Okay.
I think that the most important thing, you know, is again, I kind of do this stuff in sequence. So you have your personas and you have your user stories. Those give you very specific things and very intuitive things, most importantly, to validate. So, you know, did they do it because they didn't like the design? Did they do it because our assumption that they want to do this is wrong? You know, I think that those things a lot, there's no silver bullet, you know. I mean, some of it's just tricky and you have to, you know, go at it a couple different ways. But I think having those personas at the foundation of all these things will help you drive to a much more intuitive answer. Let me give you a specific example, actually, on something I'm working on with a collaborator. We're publishing this piece called Persona-Driven SEO in 10 Steps. How many of you guys are familiar with SEO? All right, everybody's at least a little bit familiar. One of the most interesting things about SEO is that, you know, everything that's happening now is a result of, like, how do we analyze more data more quickly, you know, more variables, more powerful analysis, which is fine, it's good, but often the most powerful realizations you can have about an SEO campaign, which, you know, kind of falls into that ilk, is, you know, this person was looking for something totally different. You know, we take our product and we parse out all the words about it and look on Google Trends and see if there's similar terms. And, you know, we're very little because we think about our product, that's our thing. But, you know, it may in fact be something totally different that this person is looking for when it's the right time to go hit them, you know. I'll give you an example. Like, for example, this practitioner and I are using the book, you know, we're tweaking the SEO on the book's site. And so he started out and he's like, okay, here are all the terms from the book, you know, and I've organized them, and I've searched, and I've looked at the opposition on them and all this stuff. And it was interesting because it was like, that's good, and it makes sense what you did, but, you know, that's not what people are thinking about when they potentially want to buy this book. And I know that because, you know, I go out and I talk to people and I have this idea of personas and things like that. So I think having those at the foundation of this is what helps you avoid confusing and sort of arbitrary confusion about your results. But some of it's just tough. You have to try a couple different things.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah.